been here for a while.
You don't want to hear all that.
No, I'm John. No, nice to meet you as well. Let me just give you that for your file. Hi, nice to meet you. I didn't have a chance to
Okay. Okay. All right, sure. Where are we going? So you speak where I was in about the third grade. 20 years ago, Sheridan School in Northwest. Yeah, either one's fine, please. No. Okay. I'll be right back. There's a glass of water there. Thank you. We want to leave them to vote, right? We don't want to take it off. That's where they have the grassroots. They're really actually listen, usually help us. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jeff DeBelko. I direct the Environmental Change and Security Project here. And on behalf of Lee Hamilton, the president of the Woodrow Wilson Center, I want to welcome you here to the center for a very, very special occasion. We're so very fortunate to have really one of the world's leading conservation figures, Dr. Jane Goodall. We're pleased that she's joining us for this Directors Forum to discuss exploring the links between conservation and human health. A word about the Wilson Center. It was founded in 1968 Act of Congress as the formal memorial to President Wilson, and is designed as a place where the worlds of policy and practice come together with the worlds of scholarship, recognizing his legacy as both a PhD and as well as a politician. And so we try to do that in forums just like this. The Environmental Change and Security Project is a 10-year-old project where we narrow the focus to the issues that we're discussing today: environment, population, and health, development issues, and get those together with the foreign policy and even security policy communities and move forward. We try to do that with research, with publications, and meetings like today's, bringing together what I think if you just talk to your neighbor, you'll see is a very diverse audience where we have a lot to learn from one another. We are, in fact, honored, since this is the second time that Dr. Goodall's here at the center, and in fact was kind enough to contribute to some of our publications, which I hope you will avail yourself of out front. ECSP, as in many of our meetings, is very thankful and wants to recognize the contribution that USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health have made to making these meetings possible with their support for the project, and we're very thankful for that. Dr. Jane Goodall, who founded the Jane Goodall Institute and is a UN Messenger of Peace, began her landmark study of chimpanzees in Tanzania in 1960 under the mentorship of anthropologist and paleontologist Dr. Louis Leakey. Her work at the Gombe Stream Chimpanzee Reserve became the foundation of future primatological research and redefined the relationship between humans and animals. One of her most significant findings, discoveries really, in the first year at Gombe was when she saw chimpanzees stripping the leaves off stems and using them to fish for ants, really leading us to, in some ways, understand that animals were using tools and really rethink our definition of what separates humans from animals. So really fundamental discovery for which we owe you a great debt of gratitude. In 1977, she founded the Jane Goodall Institute, which is a global organization supporting the work in Gombe, but also really all around the world. We were just talking about the dynamism in China and some of these places that are obviously a long way away from Tanzania, but in some sense right next door if we're looking at the world's ecosystems. Dr. Goodall travels literally an average of 300 days a year, which is fairly hard to imagine. But she does it because she is a very special person in putting these issues together in ways that both illustrate the importance of them and really the challenges that we face, but does it with a message of hope. So we're thrilled that she's here today to share her insights with us. So thank you, Dr. Goodall.
Thank you, and thank you for the honor of inviting me back. This is a prestigious place to be, and I think it shows that I must have passed muster last time, or you wouldn't have asked me back.
Standing invitation every April. Let's make an annual event.
I want to start like I always do, because if I don't, some people say, "Oh, Jane, why didn't you greet us like a chimpanzee?" And I know that there's some people in other rooms, I've just been told, with all of this being piped in. So the distance call of the chimpanzee is very appropriate. For all of you that I can't see, it's... And one of the reasons that I like to start with this call, and I've taken this call into all kinds of places like cathedrals and temples and the United Nations and the European Parliament and literally all over the world, because so often we forget that we're part of the animal kingdom. So to bring an animal's voice into the room perhaps is a little way of making us start reconsidering who we are and what is our relationship to the rest of the animal kingdom. And I was recently at a big conference, international conference in London on compassion in world farming, and I thought, it would be absolutely great if there were people out there mooing like cows and grunting like pigs, and it would just, yes, this is what we're talking about. These are who these people are. Anyhow, as you heard, I began studying the chimpanzees in 1960. And looking back over the 45 years, I think it's no question but that the most fascinating thing has been how over the years the line that once was perceived as so sharp, with human beings on the one hand and the rest of the animal kingdom on the other, became increasingly blurred. In fact, we started moving back to the kind of relationship with the animal kingdom that Charles Darwin was talking about all those years ago. And we should be very excited to think that we're part of the animal kingdom. What an amazing kingdom it is, and how much still there is to learn about it. And if you think for a minute of what it would be like to be with one of the great whales deep under the sea and be able to communicate with these haunting songs over hundreds of miles, or what it would be like to be a bat, to be able to fly through the pitch darkness and communicate with echolocation, or just to be your own dog with your nose out of the car window and feel that amazing world of smells that is the world of the dog, that we can learn about with our brains, but we can't experience, at least not in the way they do. So there is a great deal for us to understand about this amazing animal kingdom. And the more we understand about them, the more we feel a different respect for them. And hopefully that can lead to a new preoccupation with some of the moral issues about ways we use and abuse them. Chimpanzees have been terrific ambassadors from this animal kingdom, because you cannot spend time with a chimpanzee in a reasonably normal situation. Here I'm including a good family group in a zoo, and not realize very clearly how like us they are, or how like them we are. And these similarities start with the rather striking biological similarities, so that we find that we share about 99% of the structure of our DNA with chimpanzees. That means we're different with only 1% of our DNA. And isn't that amazing? Because look how different we actually are. That's what I think is fascinating. But if you could get a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee if you match the blood group. And it's because they're so like us in their immune system that they've been used in medical research by scientists wanting to know more about human disease, or the control and vaccination for human disease. The brain of the chimpanzee and the other great apes more like ours than that of any other living creature. And so it's not surprising that we find intellectual capabilities once thought unique to us, like the tool using and the tool making that you referred to. We used to be known as man the tool maker. And when I sent Louis Leakey a telegram, no faxes or emails back then, I mean, that puts it in place, doesn't it? And he said, because we were man the tool maker, he said, now we must redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans. And indeed, there is a very strong lobby today for just doing that, for including chimpanzees in the genus Homo, which I think is a mistake, because they're very clearly chimpanzees, and I suspect if you asked them, they wouldn't like to be lumped in with the genus Homo. It seems an undesirable thing to do when you look at the mess we're making of the world today. But yeah, chimpanzees, if I talk about two people greeting two friends, we can talk about kissing, embracing, or holding hands, or patting one another on the back, or perhaps if you're not too keen on the person, swaggering or shaking your fist. Well, that could be a chimpanzee or a human. The non-verbal communication is so similar. And there are the long-term supportive, affectionate bonds between family members that can last through a life of up to 60 years or even more in some captive situations. Long period of childhood, 5-6 years between live births, a period when the child is fully dependent on the mother and travels with her, rides on her back, sleeps with her at night, and even suckles, although towards the end of the time they're suckling more for reassurance and comfort than actually for any nutritional value they derive from it. And then after the birth of the next baby, still being emotionally dependent, the older child, on the mother. And so bonds getting stronger between mother and child and between brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, they have a dark side, just as we do, and in certain situations can show extreme brutality. And this is most obvious when individuals from one social group, a community, spy one or two individuals of a neighboring social group. They're very territorial, they patrol the boundaries, and if they encounter such a small group of neighbors, they will, if they can catch them, subject them to an attack so brutal that the victims are left to die of their wounds, and infants may be killed. But just as they show this brutal side of their nature, like us, so too they show compassion, love, and even true altruism. So for those people who maintain that there was a common ancestor about 6-7 million years ago, and that behavior present in chimps today and humans today was probably in that common ancestor, so that we can imagine right from the very beginning of human history, we had aggressive tendencies and tendencies towards brutality in certain situations. I passionately disagree with those who say that means violence and war are inevitable in our own species. We have evolved this extraordinary intellect which dwarfs even the most brilliant chimpanzee or bonobo or gorilla. And with this brain, we are capable of controlling our biological instincts, and most of the time we do. So that's a little preamble about the chimpanzee and the important role it's played, I think, in helping us to understand better some of our evolutionary pathway and, perhaps even more important, our relationship with the rest of the animal kingdom, the fact we're part of it and not separated from it. How sad then to find that these chimpanzee beings, who in a way have been the best ambassadors from the animal kingdom that we have, are, as we speak, vanishing rather rapidly from Africa, which is the only place we find them in the wild. And of course, along with the chimpanzees, so are going the gorillas, the bonobos, and so many of the other amazing animals of the African forests. And what's causing this? Well, most of you know. Ever-growing human populations, the increased demand on the natural habitat, people needing more land to grow their crops, to graze their cattle, to build their houses. And so all the time the wildlife is being pushed back and back and back. And in many places, animals have become locally extinct, and some have become totally extinct when you cut down a forest where there are endemic species, and many of them are gone before we even know what they are or what disease they might cure or what part they play in the whole interconnected network of life on this planet Earth. Chimpanzees are disappearing also because they're caught in the snares set by hunters to catch antelopes and pigs. The chimpanzees used to be caught in snares made of vines, and they could break the snare. Now they can usually pull the stake from the ground or break the wire, but they can't get the noose off hand or foot. So many have lost hands or feet in many parts of Africa, and many more probably die agonizing deaths of gangrene. And the greatest threat facing them today is the bushmeat trade. And this is the commercial hunting of wild animals for food that is going on all around the world. But when we're thinking about chimpanzees, we think about the trade going on in the Great Congo Basin, this last area where there have been significant numbers of the African great apes. But as I say, they are disappearing all the time because the logging companies have opened up the forests with roads, and along these roads go the hunters, camp at the end of the logging road, shoot everything, antelopes, monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees, elephants, even down to birds and bats, dry the meat in the sun or smoke it, load it on the trucks, take it back to the towns where the urban elite will pay more for it than a bit of chicken or goat. They don't have a history of domesticating animals. And all of this is unsustainable. So the chimpanzees are also endangered by diseases that they can catch from humans. In the Congo Basin, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, along with the pygmies, are susceptible to diseases brought in along the logging trucks from people coming from other parts of Africa. Even the precious chimpanzees of Gombe, known to people throughout the world, have their own terrible problems, and if we can't do something about it, they too will vanish forever. It was about 15 years ago that I was traveling along the shores of Lake Tanganyika, and the Gombe National Park is a very tiny area. It's only 30 square miles. It stretches for about 10 miles along the shore of the lake. And when I first got to Gombe in 1960, and even up to 1970, you could go by boat along the shore, the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika, and of course it's 300 and something miles long, the lake. Do you know, George, how long it is? 320?
600 kilometers.
600 kilometers, okay. I'm not bilingual enough to translate that, but anyway. And today, the 10 miles, 10, 12 miles of some sort of kilometers of the Gombe National Park is as it was. And if you go further south, the shoreline of the Mahali Mountain National Park, where there's also a population of chimpanzees, those areas have remained the same. But when 15 or so years ago I flew along the lake in a small plane, I was horrified to see the extent to which the trees outside the national park had gone. So that it wasn't just sort of some kind of deforestation, it was almost total. And most of the trees that could be seen were either those in the really, really steep ravines where people couldn't go to try and cultivate or even to get firewood, or trees planted for shade by the people living in the little villages along the shore of the lake. And that was when this question arose in my mind. How can we even think about saving these chimpanzees when the people living around are clearly struggling to survive? Great poverty in this part of Tanzania, people by and large not able to buy food cultivated in other more suitable places. Soil very thinly spread on the rocky shoreline. It's very mountainous, with the hills rising up from the Rift Escarpment. It's part of the Great Western Rift Valley. And it was very clear, upon further investigation, that the land around Gombe was being asked to support far more people than it possibly could, partly because of the normal population growth that we've seen all around the world since 1960, but also rather specifically from influxes of refugees from troubled Burundi in the north, from over the lake from eastern Congo. Many of these people not wanting to go off into the big UNHCR camps, but preferring to settle in or around the villages because many of them have relatives in that part of Tanzania, even though it's a different country. And so this led to our program Take Care, which of course I talked about before, and which I shall talk about again. And the person responsible for the success of this Take Care program is sitting down in front of me, George Strunton, and I shall make him come up here later so you can all see him, but not just yet. He's smiling and looking embarrassed. But anyway, it was George's vision that created Take Care as a program which has now been so successful in its the results that we're starting to replicate it in eastern Congo, in the Kivu area, DRC, and also around our chimpanzee sanctuaries, where we look after orphan chimpanzees whose mothers have been shot for food. And that's in Congo-Brazzaville, near Pointe Noire, and Uganda, in Ngamba Island, on Lake Victoria. So the first thing that George did was to put together a group of Tanzanians skilled in their different fields of forestry and agriculture and community relations, and someone who had been working with an HIV/AIDS program. And George kept always in the background. And so often, as you all in this room, I think, probably know, very well-meaning groups of people going out to help in poor places like this go out with their own preconceived notion as to how best to help. And so the village will be approached, and basically the message is, we're really sorry for you, we know you need help, and this is what we're going to do for you. And you all know that's true. But the Take Care team would go into a village and in the time-honored way sit down with the village elders and explain the various components of this program. At the beginning, just a few. Today, it's rather more components. And initially, the response was usually, well, we don't need, why do we need people to plant more trees? We have the women to get firewood. Why do we need to do anything about water? The women get the water. But gradually, as they began to realize some of the benefits of some of these components, like tree nurseries, the villagers all said, yes, we want this program, one and all. And we started with 12 villages with a rather small grant from the European Union. And very soon it became obvious that this program was changing the way people thought about things. So we started with the tree nurseries and various kinds of farming that were more suitable to the now very degraded, eroded country where the farming was being practiced. Methods to reclaim over-farmed land and make it fertile again. Conservation programs working with both children and older people. And then working with the regional medical authorities to provide some primary health care, some basic information about hygiene, and reading and learning and knowing about programs around the world that work to improve the education of women, realizing that as women's education increases and as they are empowered and as they begin to get more control over their lives, so they are able to plan families instead of just marrying and having child after child after child and not knowing anything different. So George can answer these questions later, but at some point during the evolution of Take Care, there were microcredit banks set up. There are 9 of them now, I think that's right, in the villages, small ones, modeled on the Grameen bank system. One of my heroes is Muhammad Yunus, and I actually had the good fortune of going with him to Bangladesh and seeing the effect of the Grameen bank on the women in some of the villages. So we set up these little microcredit banks where groups of, it's 5 women with a possibility of including 2 men taking out loans for environmentally sustainable development projects, small ones. And then if they repay, and the repay rate is about 98%, then they can take out a slightly larger loan and develop the little business that they started. The program began to work so well that it attracted the attention of other donor agencies. And USAID has been a supporter of Take Care from, I think, the 4th year, 5th year. Do you remember when USAID made its first grant? A year ago. But we had local, oh, well, all right, a year ago, so then it's in about the 10th year. But anyway, we had a very big grant from USAID a year ago, and we certainly had smaller grants locally from USAID in Tanzania before that. I took a group from the JGI USA board out to visit some of the Take Care villages last year. And one of the villages we went to, there were a group of people lined up to explain what they'd done with their microcredit loans. And one young woman stood up, and I thought she'd been briefed. And, it was too good to be true, but apparently she hadn't. This was just what was in her heart. She stood up in front of these visiting board members, and she said, "I'm here because I want to thank Take Care for giving me a life." She said, "I grew up in a large family, and we never had quite enough to eat, and there was never very good clothes, and we didn't have a very good education, and I thought that my life would run along the same kind of pattern. But then I heard about Take Care." And she said, by that time I was married and I had 1 child, and I think she'd also lost a child because there's a high infant mortality. And she went and learned about family planning, because right from the beginning we had a family planning component. Women's reproductive health unit has now been built as part of Take Care with USAID money. And she said, so I went and got out a loan from one of the little banks, and I started a small business, and I was successful, and I paid back my money, and after 3 years thought I would have another child. So they gave me a loan to employ a part-time helper so that I could look after the child and continue the business. And now she said, "I just want to tell you thank you again, because I have 2 children. They will always be well-fed, well-clothed, and well-educated." And the board just had tears running down their cheeks. This was a young woman about 24 years old. Now, she may slip and have another baby, but the point is that once you have access to counseling about family planning, reproductive health, once you have primary health measures installed so that there is less likelihood that 30% of your infants will die, then you can start really thinking about planning a family, and especially as you get better educated. So the other thing I learned on this particular board visit was that the last village I went to, there was a surprise for me. I was going to open a building, but I didn't know what the building was. And there were all these children coming out dressed in their best clothes and waving branches with flowers on them and shouting, you know, Dr. Janey, take care. And here was the ribbon to be cut, and here was the building. And what's this building? Well, the parents there in their best clothes, the teachers smiling. So what can this building be? I thought maybe it's a dispensary or a new classroom or something. No, it was a VIP latrine, a ventilation improved pit latrine. So those of you familiar with these kind of places will know the significance. But just for those of you who don't, think about what was there before. This was a building with a cement floor divided in two, with 3 little stalls on one side, 3 little holes with lids, a little tube coming up with netting on the end, and doors that close and can be latched, and on the other side another 3, little boys, little girls. What they had before was a piece of rotting wood with a hole surrounded by a rather thin layer of maybe thatch or maybe palm fronds, and stinking and sometimes quite dangerous and extremely unhygienic. And what I learned was that the primary reason that girls don't finish school is because at puberty they cannot stand this kind of condition. And so if you then equate improved women's education with a drop in family size, and over the past 40 years, the average number of children in, I don't know if it's Tanzania or a wider part of Africa, but it's gone down from 5 to 3 living ones, then you realize that for the lack of a lavatory, you get so many extra children born. And this is amazing. So this time last year, as you explained, it was my birthday. And I was telling this story to a lot of these people when I was going around talking. And so all my birthday presents from my wealthy friends were $500 checks for latrines. It was my lavatory birthday. I got 3 for Mother's Day as well. So there we are, building all the time on our resources for these villagers, improving their health, their primary health, their standards of hygiene, the methods of farming. They can now reclaim sterile land instead of going and cutting down more forest. And more importantly still, they are beginning to understand the need for conservation. They also know that we care not only about chimpanzees as a bunch of white foreigners, but that we've started this Take Care program, which is there for them. So they are becoming our partners. Many of them are our partners because they're growing woodlots near the center of the village where the women can get wood. They're no longer having to go and chop down the last bits of the seemingly dead tree stumps to cook their dinner. And if these seemingly dead tree stumps are allowed to lie without being cut, it turns out that there's an amazing regenerative power in this part of the world. And within 5 years, you have a 30-foot tree. And so little Take Care forests are springing up around some of our now 33 Take Care villages. And this is giving the last possibility for survival in the long term of the Gombe chimpanzees. They now number less than 100 in this tiny 30 square mile national park. And if we can't create leafy corridors to give them the opportunity to move out of this tiny area now, which was surrounded totally by cultivated fields, cutting them off from any opportunity to exchange genetic material with other remnant groups. But now we hope that the chimps will take advantage of these leafy corridors. We hope that we can get enough leafy corridors, enough villagers to agree. It looks as though we can, and thereby preserve the genetic pool of this very special little population of chimpanzees. there is a very, very strong HIV/AIDS component to take care. And so there is a program that's funded by the President's Health Unit, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and that is working on HIV/AIDS education, and this is part of the whole Take Care complex. And as I said earlier, the USAID came and made an assessment of the whole Take Care project last year or the year before, and were pleased with what they saw. They wanted a few more numbers, but they have actively encouraged us to submit further proposals, which has now been done. So we're very encouraged that we're going to be working increasingly collaboratively with USAID in Tanzania. And this whole thing has now led to new developments in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And George, I mean, this is a dangerous kind of place to go to, but George seems to be very intrepid, and he's going and starting another Take Care model program, working with the Dian Fossey guerrilla people and also Conservation International in this area between two national parks. And the JGI component of this, as well as trying to find out something about the chimpanzees and the chimpanzee numbers and ultimately perhaps studying them, but right for now it's working with the people. Again, trying to get the people on our side and helping them to realize that as the environment is destroyed, so their own life becomes increasingly hard and difficult. And this is a message that's easy because the old people in the villages understand totally. They remember what it was like when they were young. They know what it's like to see soil that was once fertile becoming increasingly eroded and infertile. And so it's not difficult to get many of them on our side. So the final component of all this is our program for youth. This is Roots and Shoots, which began in Tanzania in 1991. It's a symbolic name. Roots make a firm foundation. Shoots seem tiny, but to reach the sun can break through brick walls. And if we see the brick walls as all the problems that we've inflicted on this planet, then it's a message of hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people can break through the problems of social inequality and poverty and disease and environmental degradation and make this a better world for all living things. It began with high school students, just 16 of them. Today we have over 7,500 active groups, and a group can be anything up to a whole school. And we have programs from preschool right through university, and it's even springing out beyond. It's a program that's gone into 90 countries, and we were talking earlier about the effect it's having in China, where we now have 3 different offices, and I don't know how many Roots and Shoots groups out there. I don't have the most recent figures, but it's a lot. So there we have it in 90 countries, linking young people around the world and helping them to understand better those of other nations and religions and cultures, and helping them to understand too that they are a part of this amazing animal kingdom. It's a program emphasizing understanding and respect and compassion. It's a program eschewing the solving of problems through any kind of violence. It's promoting negotiation for conflict resolution rather than picking up a gun and shooting or even using your fist. The more we realize that we're part of this animal kingdom, the more we realize that some of these health problems that are very frightening as we look around the world today should have been foreseen long ago. The fact that these diseases are passing from animals to humans with increasing frequency is all a measure, I suspect, of increasing human population density, the increasing reliance on wild animals for food, the transfer of blood from wild animals to humans through butchering corpses or even picking up a dead animal that may be diseased with something like Ebola. And I'm talking about things like HIV HIV-1 and HIV-2 was shown by Beatrice Hahn of the University of Alabama to have been started from contamination by two different populations of chimpanzees in Africa, and then having jumped the species barrier, mutated, leaving us with the lethal form of HIV/AIDS that, as we know, is such a major threat all around the world, the major cause of death in Tanzania, combined with the TB that's associated with it. And there's not much point in my killing myself to try and save chimpanzees in Africa, talking about the need to conserve forests, talking about things like the forests being the lungs of the world. There's not much point even in telling people that we need to preserve these things because they're part of our psychological need. We need them to grow into healthy people. But there's no good my doing any of this, or any of us who care about wilderness and animal species, if at the same time we're not devoting huge amounts of energy to raising young people to be better stewards than we have been. And Roots and Shoots began because as I was traveling further and further around the world, initially just talking about the plight of the chimps, other creatures, and the state of the environment, I met so many young people who seemed to have lost hope. And they were either depressed, or they were apathetic, or they were angry and sometimes violent and bitter. And when I began talking to them, and these were high school students, but more university students, they all said more or less the same thing. They felt that way because they felt that we were compromising or had compromised their future, and we have. I've got 3 little grandchildren, and when I look in their eyes and think how we've harmed this planet since I was their age, think of things like the lessening water, the terrible diseases that are everywhere, the poverty, well, all these things. I just feel pain, shame, and so I want to devote the rest of my life to helping young people realize that if they join programs like Roots and Shoots, which has as its main message that every individual matters and every individual has a role to play, where every group, and it works in groups mainly, chooses 3 different kinds of project to make the world a better place. Roll up your sleeves and do something to help your own human community. What you do depends where you live, what the problems are, how old you are, how wealthy you are, things like that. Your typical community outreach. And then looking beyond your own community. What can you do in the rest of the world, especially if you're wealthy? But sometimes, what can you do for the wealthy when you're very poor, but you still have clean water and clean air? And you have things to share, which some of the wealthy communities around the world have lost. And the second project, something to help animals, including domestic animals, including these animals that we torture by their millions, by their billions, for the table. And thirdly, something which will help the environment that we all share. And since 9/11, we've had a strong component for a peace initiative to help these young people link around the world and understand more about each other, and therefore hopefully be less afraid and learn how we need to solve our problems by using this extraordinary brain and by using this amazing capacity we have for communicating through language, now electronically, which differentiates us, I think, more than any other single thing from our closest living relatives on the planet, the chimpanzee. The time has come when we must use this gift that we have, this extraordinary power that we have to become responsible stewards and share what we know with children. So thank you for the opportunity of sharing the message.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. It's really difficult to keep one's hope up when working so closely on these issues, and I think it's critical to do so, and you really help us do that, because I think as you say, it is a message of hope, one that is couched in the terms of pressing problems, but nevertheless that we must press forward and have to be hopeful in doing that. We have some time for some questions. I have colleagues who have microphones. I'd ask that you just let us know who you are before posing your question to Dr. Goodall, and we'll have a chat here. So who would like to kick us off?
I would like to warn my team that before we end, I'm going to ask you all to come up here, because I couldn't do what I do without the amazing people who help the Jane Goodall Institute around the world, and I wouldn't be here but for them. So before we leave, I want you all to come up. I see you sitting in some difficult places, but so please make time before we go for these people to have the honor I wish to pay them.
We will do that. In fact, they expressed the thrill that you are here, because of course JGI has an office here in town, that they could see you, because of course they work with you all the time, but don't necessarily get to come to the speeches, so we're thrilled that they could be with us. Jeff Burnham, please.
Jane, I'm Jeff Burnham. I'm a special advisor in the Africa Bureau at the State Department, and I wondered if you or George might want to comment a little more on the project you're launching at Lake Kivu. That's a very difficult part of the world to work in. We heard a briefing from Doctors Without Borders last week, which was very inspirational about how one works in an area where there's still a lot of conflict, but we know in the Africa Bureau that this kind of program that you're working on will be an important part of cooperation, and as the situation continues to improve and we in the area, or at least we hope that'll be the case.
I would like George to answer this, because I haven't
Jane,
even
in
been
fact, we
there.
can have someone. Ali, could you bring the microphone down to George Stundren down here in the front?
Thank you. Yes, maybe I want to mention before I start something Jane forgot to mention, is that this project we are starting in Eastern DRC has been supported by the Global Health Bureau, Office of Population, and the Global Development Alliance. So since 1.5 years we work in Eastern DRC now. Our partner on the ground is the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund International, and they have, before we joined that partnership, set up a very strong umbrella NGO of several local grassroots NGOs who are set around ethnic lines, and they are our main partners on the ground. And we can operate in that area even if the security is still not very good, and it's a very dangerous place with many different armed groups fighting each other. But since we have this very strong, well-established local association partners, we can work in these remote areas. We use people from these areas to deliver our messages and to start implementing activities. So, but generally we observe that the situation is improving now. The Interahamwe, the most dangerous group there, has just declared that they want to put down their arms. So we have a timid optimism coming up, but it's dangerous still. But since we mainly work with local partners, we can operate.
Gentleman in the middle, in the back. Get a microphone too. Could you raise your hand again so I can see? Great.
I'm Adam Reinhart with USAID. I recently was in Tanzania for a regional sub-Saharan horticulture conference, and one of the attendees was from eastern part of Congo, DRC. And he was telling me that in the local markets, bushmeat went for $10 a kilo when cow meat went for $1 a kilo. And even with that price disparity, nobody wanted to buy the cow meat, only the bushmeat. And you did sort of hint at this in your, more than hint, you actually talked a little bit about this in your speech, but I would like, that sounded, when I heard that, I was very depressed about the likelihood of those species surviving, and I was wondering what you're doing to work on that, or what you could do to work on that, or how we could sort of help, I suppose.
Well, we have joined the Congo Basin Forest Partnership Initiative, which was launched by the US Department of State with matching funds from the European Union and some of the big conservation groups putting funding in there as well. And basically that was to explore ways of trying to control this trade in bushmeat, because whether it's an endangered creature like a chimpanzee or a gorilla, or whether at the moment it's not endangered at all, the demand is so great. It's greater than what I even said, because, okay, you have, in the old days you had subsistence hunting, and you had people who used the animals, and I'm talking about just the forest for the moment, used the animals from the forest for their own, what they needed. But now with the roads, you get the commercial aspect, you get the hunters shooting everything and selling it in the towns, and a lot of it is shipped even overseas. You can get bushmeat from Africa in exotic restaurants, usually those where there are ethnic groups of people exiled from their country. It's even been suggested that the terrible foot and mouth epidemic in the UK came originally from bushmeat smuggled in to London from Ghana. And it's not only this commercial trade. In addition to that, you have the logging camps where you may have 2,000 to 3,000 people, the loggers and their families, who weren't there before, living in the forest or around the edge. And the pygmies living in the forest are being given guns and ammunition and paid to shoot for those people. And on top of that, you've got all the people who were always there before who are using the bushmeat for their own subsistence. So by making partnerships on the ground with the local NGOs, with the government officials, with donor agencies like USAID and World Bank, and our role being to make partners of the local people, first of all to try and put some kind of control on the exploitation of endangered species. And interestingly, we had a young woman, Christina Ellis, out in Cameroon, and she found that a lot of the women realized that this is totally unsustainable, and they have started cooperatives themselves, the women selling the meat in the marketplace, and are urging the issuing of licenses. But we also have to work to educate people to get away from this tremendous culture, and what you said, $10, $1, that's even more than I've ever heard, and that's really frightening. But is there some way that we could smoke the cow meat so that they would find it tasted as good as the wild animals? I don't know. I mean, this is something we're all struggling with, and our Roots and Shoots program is tackling that in the refugee camps, where the young men go out into the surrounding country in ever bigger circles, shooting what's there, partly to amuse themselves, entertain themselves, because they don't have much to do in the camps, but also because sometimes they're very short of food. So we're always looking for ideas, because the problem is huge. And you're right, we are eating animals to extinction. It's not just in Africa, it's in Indonesia, South America, and it's all over China. So it is a huge problem, and it's all tied in with increasing human population, increasing demand. And it's, you know, it's when you think what we're doing to our domestic animals, breeding them in their thousands, what happens, as you say, to these wild animals who are not breeding in their thousands. We have some program for domesticating cane rats, sometimes known as grass cutters. The people do like eating those, and so that's a promising avenue of research to breed the kind of animals they do like to eat. Some people have tried breeding duikers. We've got an awful long way to go. So I didn't answer the question because I can't, except to say we're really trying.
Jane, could I ask a question? You've talked a lot about the grassroots approach and really encouraging work that JGI is doing there. But could you also tell us about, because in some ways you talk to more of the heads of state than perhaps a few of us do, the reception to your message from world leaders. I've recently seen a very complimentary letter, for example, from the president of Tanzania, who particularly the fact that you have this holistic integrated program that you described for us with Take Care. But what do you find at this kind of senior most level of leadership, and how receptive are they, and how are you finding them as partners in this effort as well?
Well, of course, it's going to differ depending on who you talk to and which country. When I meet people, they're always terribly receptive, but that doesn't necessarily mean very much, as you know. And also, you meet somebody one day and they've been replaced the next. And we all know about levels of corruption, and we should not for a moment kid ourselves that that's only in developing countries. There's huge levels of corruption, seems to me, wherever there are people. But by and large, well, isn't that true? By and large, it's well received. Like, for example, in China, the government asked me to put roots and shoots in the schools at a time when everybody said, well, how did you do that? And we only recently became really official in China, but of course the government knows exactly what you're doing. So we may even have planted some seeds of roots and shoots in Pyongyang. Seriously, I was there. In Africa, the government officials usually are cooperative in word, and sometimes indeed, at least if you get their official approval, and it's usually there's television, you know, and so it's on television or it's in the newspaper, then at least it gives you the freedom to work. And then the people down on the ground know that it's okay to cooperate. So you try and make the connections locally, but then you get approval from the top. So I've always found it better to start at the bottom and then finally get the approval from the top, and it goes back down.
Yes, ma'am, in the front row. Down here.
I'm Maggie Fox with Reuters. I'm a reporter. I want to ask you what use can be made, or what's the relationship of outbreaks of diseases like Marburg and Ebola that come fairly clearly straight from the bushmeat trade? How can those be used to help the animals and to help stop the trade?
Well, it's certainly another area where one hopes that it can be useful. You know, some people say, well, if all the local people know that chimpanzees can give them HIV/AIDS, they're going to shoot every chimpanzee they possibly can. I don't think so, but you know, the thing is, you have to try and get all these different measures meshing with each other. So it's no good telling them not to eat the bush meat, or saying or trying to help them understand that it's inappropriate, rather, because we don't tell people anything. If at the same time you can't make suggestions as to alternative things that they can get their protein from. And so this is what makes it so difficult. But yes, and it's not just there either, it's SARS, and then it's all the diseases we're going to get from pigs and chickens and goodness knows what else, with all this misuse of antibiotics in animal feed. So the animals, in a way, are going to get their own back.
Eckhard Kleiner.
My name is Eckhard Kleiner. I'm working with John Snow Incorporated here in DC. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Goodall, for your inspiring words. And I was wondering whether you would have some advice to those of us who tend to work more along sector lines. I mean, we tend to work to focus on our public health work, or if we work in the environment, we tend to focus more on conservation. But often we seem to have a hard time talking to each other and coordinating and what we do around the areas where the issues that you talked about really matter a whole lot. What can we do to see more of the Take Care programs, for example, in other countries? Or in Tanzania, probably, there are other opportunities as well. If you could give us some ideas.
Yeah, well, there's opportunities around every wilderness area to improve the chances of saving some of that wilderness area by programs like Take Care. And I've talked about replicating take care, you know, in many, many places where they're struggling with conservation issues like India, like China. Well, the easy answer is we need lots of money, but that's not what you mean, but it is an issue. No, I think gatherings like this, but you see, right from the beginning with Take Care, I had an advantage when I started studying chimps in that I didn't have a degree of any sort, not even a BA. And so I approached the chimps with a kind of open mind and just decided that, well, of course they had personalities, minds and feelings. And then when I got to Cambridge and was told that wasn't so, I knew that the professors were wrong because I'd had a dog. So, you know, so in a way I've always started things backwards. So when the idea of Take Care first came, before it became Take Care or anything like that, it seemed obvious that there were people in the area, but they weren't, as you say, talking to each other. So we had NORAD out there doing things with the forestry, or saying they were, although the trees were disappearing very fast. And then there were other agencies working with water and other people doing health, and a lot of health people who weren't at all collaborating with the Tanzanians. So right from the beginning, Take Care was built up with the hope that we could tie in all these disparate bits. And George will remember very well that at the beginning people were always saying to him, George, you're trying to do too much. You know, you've got to concentrate on one thing or another. But how can you? It's what I was saying with the bushmeat. You've got to link all these little bits together. So maybe a school like this can give courses in how you integrate the different sections of aid, the different sections of, because they are so interrelated. You know, what's the point of talking about health and immunizing people if you're not concentrating on supplies of clean water, or even water at all, and so on?
Okay, Amy Christensen, all the way in the back.
I'm Amy Christensen. I'm currently with the World Bank, but this is my personal capacity. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment just came out last week, and I was wondering, have you spoken with them? Because it seems all you've learned on the ground would be so valuable for them as they consider how to implement the recommendations of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which showed what you've found, the interconnection, the interrelationships, and the success that you've seen as the World Bank has a new leader coming in, some opportunities perhaps to embrace some of the, I'm always hopeful, some of the approaches that you've shown.
Well, we have been having a lot of dialogue with Jim Wolfenson at the World Bank, particularly on forests and forest conservation, and you know, how it will work with the new leader. Maybe I'll come and have a talk to you if you think it's going to be helpful. I don't know. But yes, of course, we have been in conversations with the World Bank for at least the last 4-5 years, I think.
Yes, gentleman here.
I'm Roger Hamilton, Inter-American Development Bank. I was just curious how important you feel the role of political institutions are in your ultimate efforts to save the chimpanzees and to save the forests, which are their habitat.
By political institutions, you mean?
Local governments, national governments, the existence of institutions which are able to carry out programs which are, you know, basically to insert themselves in the areas where the problems exist.
I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, we couldn't do what we do without the specific support of the governments, local and central, and we have to have that. And in some cases, the government organizations have been very helpful. It's helped us to get the programs down into some of the institutions. So, you know, but then again, it depends who's in the government at the time. And sometimes we found in Tanzania that the Minister of the Environment has been almost hostile to what we're trying to do. And then that turns out usually because in their portfolio, they also are responsible for natural resources, and there's a big conflict. So I don't know, I always think of these things as individual people, and the time when you approach them.
Okay, just right behind.
Sibylla Klenzendorf from World Wildlife Fund. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more concrete details of how you weave your conservation messages into your Take Care program. So when you build schools or toilets, how you expand that and bring it to the local communities, of how that ties back into conservation efforts like chimp conservation.
Well, we do an awful lot of that by working with the young people, and we even take them on trips into Gombe. They probably won't see chimpanzees, but at least they'll see forest, which is their birthright, which has been destroyed. And we're just launching a program. Some of our longest serving Tanzanian field staff have just retired because they're getting on. And so, but they really don't like leaving the field. So we've now brought them into a program where they're going around the schools and the villages with all their knowledge, all their wisdom, their love of the chimpanzees. And they know each one. They've watched them grow up. And so they're talking in the schools and sharing that information, and at the same time talking about what they remember when they were young and how different it was and how this stream ran clean and how it can again. So it's basically by telling stories. Telling stories is the very best way. And then when you have old people coming in and saying, yes, they're quite right, and there used to be more rain, and it's our fault there isn't more rain because we've cut all the trees down. And yes, look at this land here. It used to grow big tomatoes or tomatoes, but now look how big they are, and that's your fault. And there's a wonderful mix in this area of the old traditional animistic beliefs and Christianity and Islam. They're all mixed up together. And so you often get the old beliefs coming through. So when you get these terrible landslides, which sometimes sends houses and people into the lake because of all the destruction and the steep slopes, the local people are saying, well, that's because the spirits of the trees are angry with you. And I say, fine, if they think the spirits of the trees are angry with you, that's another little piece that we can add in. The spirits of the trees are angry, so plant some more. And let these stumps grow up, and let's appease everybody.
Right in the middle. Ali, down here in the middle. Right down here.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Kavita Raj, and I'm heading to medical school in the fall. And it's my understanding that a huge number of chimps and other primates are used in medical research and primate research facilities. And to me, the fact that they're so genetically similar doesn't justify the acts we commit against them in these research facilities. A lot of very horrific experiments. I was wondering if you could comment on the impact of chimps and other animals used in such research under the auspices of science and its impact on the numbers of these animals.
Well, you're raising a whole can of worms. This could take us another hour. But in the past, there was a definite impact on wild numbers because a lot of the live animal trade was in order to get babies for medical research and space research as well. Today, that live animal research is not really affecting wild populations because of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And chimps are endangered. But you're right, it's morally wrong to be inflicting sometimes extremely painful experiments on sentient, sapient beings like chimpanzees, but also like dogs and cats. And if you talk to people who've done their research and look through the history of innovations in medical research, you find the contradiction from what the animal experimenters say. They say, basically, well, we'll always need some animals, we'll try and treat them better and use as few as possible. But animals have been responsible for the major breakthroughs. The historians say, no, it was basically epidemiology and clinical observation that led to the breakthroughs, and it's the governments that have forced us to test on the animals for the veracity of these things. If you want a really good book on that, there's a book called Sacred Cows and Golden Geese by Ray Greek and his wife Jean Swindler Greek, and it's super, and they're just producing another one. But see, I'm saying let's have a different mindset. Let's say we admit that we're inflicting cruelty on these beings. So for heaven's sake, let's get these brains of ours together around the world and find more alternatives, because of the animal rights movement, many alternatives exist, which 10 years ago the animal experimenters said never would exist, because we're so clever. And let's say that we should try and find ways of doing it without animals as quickly as possible. That's what I say to that. You know, this could be a very long discussion.
Hi, my name is Rachel Furtick. I'm at EPA in the Office of Water. And first, I just wanted to thank you for your work and for serving as such a wonderful role model, especially for young women. But my question has to do with, in your efforts to spread the Take Care program in Africa, I was wondering what links might have been made between that work and the Green Belt movement, especially in light of the wonderful news with Wangari Maathai winning the Peace Award.
Well, we are trying to form partnerships with the Green Belt movement, certainly in Kenya where it began, but also we're trying in Congo, Brazzaville, where Wangari is coming to a big event there, and we hope to link up that whole Green Belt movement with the Roots and Shoots, because the world is so filled with problems that we need to form partnerships and more partnerships and more partnerships, and make use of infrastructure that already exists and not reinvent the wheel. And when something works, let's find ways to replicate it and not try and do something different. So, yeah, definitely.
Joyce Namdi with the State Department in the Office of Ecology and Terrestrial Conservation, and I admit I used to eat grass cutter in Nigeria. And along the lines we were just speaking of, are you finding that the bushmeat issue is being accepted and taken into the wildlife trafficking movement and organizations that exist? Wildlife trafficking in the past has not included bushmeat. It is focused primarily on live animals and other parts used for other purposes, like medicinal. Do you find that there are more linkages, that bushmeat is making inroads into being part of that whole issue with wildlife trafficking?
Well, I'm pretty sure it is. Certainly is in Asia. Does anybody know for sure? I think so. It comes into the big CITES meetings now. There's a whole section on bushmeat, so I'm sure that's true. But
anyone else want to care to comment? Yeah, so.
I'm with the Bushmeat Crisis Task Force.
The microphone.
You must be able to answer the question for me.
Well, thanks to people like you. Jane Goodall Institute is a member of the Bushmeat Crisis Task Force, and I just wanted to indicate that I know that Traffic, which monitors these trade issues, is considering a Central African bureau, and they've been bringing attention to bushmeat issues in East and Southern Africa for some time now. Also, CITES has a bushmeat working group, I should mention.
Jane, you mentioned you had another story you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, I wanted to share one last story before I introduce you to the JGI team. And it's about a chimpanzee who was born in Africa, whose mother was shot when he was about 2 years old, because, as I say, there used to be a strong trade in live animals, and chimpanzees were taken from the wild by shooting the mother for entertainment and zoos and medical research and what have you. And he was shipped to a North American zoo where he was named Jojo. And for about 15 years, he lived by himself in a small, old-fashioned zoo cage with a cement floor and iron bars. And then a new zoo director decided to build a large enclosure, and he bought 19 other chimps. The enclosure was surrounded by a moat filled with water because chimps don't swim. And first of all, they had to very carefully introduce all these chimps, because I said how like humans chimpanzees are, and the males have this, this dominance drive. They've got to work out who's the top. And so that had to happen first. And the girls had to find their places as well. And finally that's all done and everybody's out in the enclosure. And it's fine for a while. And then one of the new young males decides to challenge the senior male. Well, the senior male's Jojo. You have to learn how to behave from your society. And Jojo hadn't had the opportunity. He was so little when he was captured. So when this young male starts swaggering and bristling and standing upright and hurling rocks and looking very intimidating, Jojo is absolutely terrified. And he runs into the water because he doesn't know anything about water either. And he manages in his fear to get over the barrier that's built to prevent the chimps drowning in the deep water beyond. And 3 times he comes up gasping for breath, and then he's gone. And on the other side of the moat is a little group of people, not many because it was cold and wet. There was a keeper. The keeper knew that Jojo weighed 130 pounds and that male chimps are much stronger than us and can be dangerous. So he ran off to get a stick, trying to pull Jojo out of the water with the stick. But luckily for Jojo, there was a man there who visits the zoo 1 day a year with his wife and his 3 little girls. And he jumped in spite of a keeper grabbing onto him and saying he'd be killed. He pulled away, and he had to swim under the water. He felt Jojo's body. He got this 130-pound dead weight over his shoulder. He managed to get over that barrier, and he could feel small movements. Jojo wasn't dead yet. And so he pushes him up onto the bank of the enclosure and then turns to rejoin his slightly hysterical family. Well, there was a woman there with a video camera. So you see and hear what happened next, although the camera's all over the place because the woman didn't even remember she was filming, realized she was filming. And you see the people on the bank suddenly start screaming at Rick to hurry back, that he's going to be killed, because they can see from their higher vantage point 3 of the big males coming down to see what all the commotion is about. And at the same time, Jojo is sliding back into the water because the bank is too steep. And this film all over the place suddenly steadies on Rick, and you see him standing there. He's got one hand on that railing, and you see him look up at his wife and children. You see him looking up at these 3 males, and then you see him looking down at Jojo, who's just going under the water again. And for a moment he's motionless, and then he went back. And again he pushed Jojo up and continued to push him, ignoring the approaching chimps, ignoring the screaming people, and Jojo is desperately struggling to grab onto something. And just in time, he gets hold of a thick tuft of grass, and with Rick pushing, manages to get onto the level ground. And just in time, Rick gets back over that barrier. And that evening, that little piece of video was flashed across North America, and the then director of JGI USA saw it, and he called up Rick Swope. He said, "That was a very brave thing you did. You must have known it was dangerous. Everyone was telling you. What made you do it?" And Rick said, "Well, you see, I happened to look into his eyes, and it was like looking into the eyes of a man. And the message was, won't anybody help me?" And you see, that's the message I've seen in the little chimps tied up in the marketplace that led to our sanctuaries. I've seen it looking out from the eyes of the chimps in the 5-foot by 5-foot prisons of the medical research labs. I've seen it looking out from under the frills of the cruelly trained circus chimps, in the eyes of chained elephants, of dogs thrown out. I've seen it in the eyes of little children who've seen their parents killed in the ethnic violence in Africa, and in the eyes of kids caught up in street violence with nowhere to go. And if you see that look with your eyes and you feel it in your heart, you have to jump in and try to help. And although the world today perhaps has more problems, more danger than ever before, I do believe it's true that there are more people, more little NGOs and special interest groups, more than ever before. And everywhere we have one of these problems, there's sure to be a group of people, or even one person, giving so much to try and put that problem right. And that's where I feel hope. When you have people in high position, decision-making positions in USAID or World Bank or or whatever group it happens to be, making the right decisions to help the problems, as well as ordinary people and the grassroots people down on the ground. That's really the hope for the future. And that's the perfect opportunity to introduce my team. And you have to come right up here on the platform because we couldn't do without you. So we have to have a last minute for this little ceremony, because this is JGI. These are your neighbors. These you can go and visit down the road. Just say who you are.
My name is Nona Gandelman, VP of Communications.
My name is Laura Brown. I'm the Communications Coordinator.
My name is George Stranden, VP Africa Programs.
Alice Macharia, Africa Programs.
Lisa Farrow, Africa Programs.
Nathan Martin, Grant Writer in Africa Programs.
Mary Lewis, Jane's assistant.
Catherine Fox, Mary's assistant.
Rob Sasser, Special Projects Coordinator and Mary's other assistant.
Karen Vermillion, Development Intern.
Jane, we're really speechless after that last story and really the whole powerful presentation. And we thank all of your colleagues and all of you for joining us and sharing your insights, your experience, and your hope that will hopefully take us forward against these challenges. So thank you very much for coming to us. If you want to share this presentation with your friends, it will be on the Wilson Center website in video. So I urge you to come and visit it there.